Part 4, Effect. Take a simple idea and take it seriously. Charlie Munger. Part 3 explored various ways to slice, chop, separate, and dissect magic effects. Now we will look at effect itself and the underpinnings that make great magic great. We begin this chapter with one of the most notable 20th century contributions to magic literature, Rick Johnsson's celebrated essay, The Too Perfect Theory. Many of the notable minds included in this collection have defended, Carney, Swiss, Close, or challenged, Ortiz, Wonder, Stone, this theory, and the debate will rage on. Eugene Berger took an insightful oblique angle. Man, when in an analytic state of mind, must have an answer or solution to those things that bewilder him. Perhaps the context of an effect will determine how perfectly it will be perceived. The Too Perfect Theory by Rick Johnsson. Recently, there was a great brouhaha on a national basis brought about by a statement attributed to Di Vernon, who was supposed to have said something to the effect that the spectator never or rarely was fooled by what a magician performed for him in the way of tricks. To Vernon's enemies, this was the long-awaited proof that the grand old man had lost his grip, that the old pharaoh had shuffled off his mortal coil. Even some Vernon disciples were of the impression that the professor needed to mentally rock and reweave. Others simply felt that the old man was suffering from some sort of senile phantasmagoria. I don't know whether there ever was a full explanation in print by Vernon amplifying this statement, if indeed he did make it at all. I must admit that it sounds like something he would have said. It's pleasant to think that he might have. The battle brought about by this statement is over, but the wounds are still open and bleeding, and while I don't think Vernon needs or wants anyone to explain his thoughts, it does provide me with an opportunity to discuss a pet theory of mine. It is a firm belief of mine, and I suspect that this was the underlying thought behind the famous or infamous statement of the professors that not only do we magicians not fool the spectator, but we should not, we must not fool them. It is by not fooling the spectator that we magicians are most effective. In order to understand and subsequently accept this heretical statement, we must first examine and agree upon two basic premises. Premise 1. 20th century man no longer attributes the magician with supernatural powers. Premise 2. To rational man, the unknown is unacceptable. Premise 1. It's reasonable to assume that most will agree that, with the possible exception of a few uneducated and/or extremely superstitious people, most spectators realize that the miracles performed by the conjurer are brought about by natural, albeit clever and sneaky, means. The only exception to this rule would be in the area of mentalism. Perhaps this would not have been valid in the not-too-distant past, but the rapid advances in our technology in the past couple of decades have made this a definite reality. A positive side effect of this phenomenon is that this society, made more sophisticated by both scientific advances and exposure to magicians' methods from early childhood, now is more than willing to give the performer full credit for his miracles. About time, too. Premise 2. From the time of the early caveman, as curious as he was hairy, man has waged a never-ending battle, searching for reasons behind the mysteries which surround him. Think of the countless numbers of scientists and philosophers who have devoted their entire lives in search of the key to the riddles which besiege man at every turn. Think of the billions of dollars and the number of man-hours spent in the past decade just to solve some of the mysteries of space. In his early formative years, and even now, man has often found himself ill-equipped and unable to solve that which befuddled him. But man cannot live with the unsolvable, and from what scholars tell us, very quickly developed the concept of an omniscient and omnipotent force or power to which or to whom he could attribute those unsolvables. The two whiches came first: the sun, the moon, the earth. The to whoms came later as man developed a certain amount of sophistication and needed a personification with whom he might relate. They've taken many forms over the years: Isis, Buddha, Jehovah, God. But regardless of their form or identity, the concept is for an identical purpose: to provide man with a temporary placebo, to allow him to live comfortably with that which he cannot understand. Now, that which is inexplicable, and therefore unacceptable, becomes the wisdom of Allah, or the will of God, an acceptable if not completely rational compromise. Don't forget either that in many cases, yesterday's will of God has today become a virus, a gene, magnetic flux, gravity, etc. Please don't think for a moment that the foregoing has been an attempt to prove or disprove the existence of a supreme power. This is neither the time nor the place for such a discussion, and should be carried out by those eminently more qualified. It has merely served to develop properly the following 3 hypotheses. Number 1. Man will find or invent an answer for that which baffles him. Number 2. That answer need not be completely rational and or consistent with available data. And number 3. Man is flexible in changing his answers in the light of more complete or acceptable data. You may very well ask at this point just what all this metaphysics has to do with the original statement and magic in general. Therefore, if we combine premise 1 and the first 2 hypotheses developed in premise 2, we can now understand why the spectator leaves the performance of a magician explaining or shrugging off all tricks done with a "it went up his sleeve" or a "it's done with mirrors," or some such inane explanation, completely inconsistent with the facts. But to him, it's an acceptable answer. An answer of the foregoing type usually indicates that the spectator is completely baffled and is grabbing at straws. In some cases, this is acceptable, but in others it can spell disaster. At its worst, the spectator can and will eliminate all solutions except one, and in many cases, that is the correct one. At best, he may take the credit away from the performer himself and relegate it to some mechanical contrivance, or, in the case of a card trick, for example, assume it was a self-working trick or a trick deck. In either case, the magician winds up with the short end of the wand. However, if we now introduce hypothesis 3, we can easily see that the spectator is open to suggestion for his solution, and in some cases, it would be wise for us to provide him with a possible solution of our own choosing, and which would accomplish the following. Number 1. Lead him away from the correct solution. Number 2. Be acceptable to him. Number 3. not detract from the effect of the trick. And number 4, give the magician full credit for his skill. Just for a moment, let's climb into the mind of a spectator who has just participated in a card trick. Let's listen to how his reasoning might be progressing. Let me see now. That sly old devil gave me a deck of cards, had me take them into the next room, shuffle them, select any one I wanted to, put the card back into the deck, put the deck in my pocket, and then come back into the room where he was. Then, without asking me any questions or even touching the deck, he told me what card I took. Wonder how he did that. Probably a stacked deck. But wait, it couldn't be. I shuffled the deck. It's probably some clever sleight of hand. But that couldn't be either, because he never touched the deck. Could be a trick deck, because it was his deck. Wonder what kind it could be. Eureka! A deck where all the cards are the same. I thought he went south with that deck awfully quick. That has to be it. Aren't I clever? Thus, we can see that by not pointing the spectator in another direction, we have allowed him to travel down a very dangerous path, one that leads him to the only possible open solution, and most probably the correct one. Correct or not, the result is the same. The spectator has claimed the credit for himself, or at best, transferred the credit to the trick deck. In either case, the effect, therefore the entertainment value, is lost for the most part. It is then safe to postulate the tenets of the two-perfect theory. Some tricks, by virtue of their perfection, become imperfect. Conversely, some tricks, by virtue of their imperfection, become perfect. As we have already tested the first half of the theory, let's now show, or attempt to show, how imperfection can perfect an effect which is too perfect. Before commencing, it might be worth mentioning for the sake of completeness that there is another technique, that of eliminating all possible solutions. In the above, for example, we could use the spectator's own deck and leave it with him in his pocket when the trick is over. I'll leave that to you. I'll take the easier path. Now, to the job of imperfecting. In the above example, there are a number of immediate possibilities that may or may not do the job. Number 1. Instead of the spectator leaving the room, merely have him stand at the opposite end of the room or just across the table from you. It might seemingly be less impossible this way. Number 2. Before commencing the trick, place 2 indifferent cards in the one-way deck, one at the bottom and one near the middle. Turn the deck face up and cut at the indifferent card in the middle. Then do a tight dovetail shuffle. Said shuffle is done in front of the spectators, of course. Number 3. Before disclosing the selected card, take the deck back from the spectator and handle it a bit. Perhaps instead of producing the card itself, magically cut to 2 cards, one which shows the value and the second one the suit. This is made easy by including those 2 cards in the deck to begin with. The chances are slight that the spectator will select them. They can be short cards for easy location later. Another completely different approach is to have a regular deck in the coat pocket with the 2 indicator cards on top. Drop the deck that the spectator used in the same pocket. Pull out dramatically the 2 indicator cards, and while the spectators are still in a state of shock, casually remove the regular deck and set it on the table, ready for the spectator to grab if he cares to. Another benefit of this approach is that this deck can be stacked for a miracle, which you immediately go into with a deck shuffled by the spectator. And number 4, you may really change the format of the effect by handling the deck a bit first, just a simple cut or so. Then ask the spectator to mentally spell the name of his card as you remove one card at a time from the top of the deck. Whenever he stops you, you have a miracle. Go into a computer-type presentation if you wish, with nothing to remember. The possibilities are endless. Just avoid the desire to eliminate all the imperfections. As you can readily see in the above examples, the imperfections, while weakening the effect from a strength standpoint, actually strengthen the effect from the standpoint that the spectator is led away from the actual method by being shown and pushed down numerous blind alleys, all of which should bring him to the conclusion, I didn't see that sly old fox do a darn thing, but he had ample opportunity to do something sneaky. Gee, what a clever guy. Don't forget, we were working around the premise that a forcing deck was the method we wanted to use, and all the above suggestions were based on the use of that method. There are other methods for doing the same effect with regular cards. Ron Wilson has one of the best I've seen. Ask him to show it to you the next time you're at the Magic Castle. Perhaps another short example in this area might be appropriate. Leo Benke and I developed a routine that utilized a forcing deck and fooled some of the sharpest minds in Magic. How? Simple. We interjected a couple of Pharaoh shuffles into the routine. Now, who in the world would have to Pharaoh a forcing deck? It took the magicians down another path and away from the real method, didn't it? Hooray for imperfections! There's a strong possibility that one of the greatest card tricks and principles to be developed in recent years is Gene Fennell's spelling the aces, using the free cut principle. But if you were among the many who did the effect just as it was explained in the directions, more often than not, you heard one or more spectators comment, "Humph, must be a self-working trick." Obviously, you didn't get credit for the trick. In that form, it's too perfect. However, if, just before spelling the aces, you give the deck a false cut and shuffle and then bring the trick to its conclusion, fancy finger flinging is fine. You're supposed to be doing something. The spectator's mental process probably will sound like this. Man, that guy's hands must move like quicksilver. I didn't see him do a thing while he was shuffling the cards, but he must have done some sneaky sleight of hand that I couldn't catch. Decidedly clever. Who got the credit this time? Obviously, all the above examples were self-working tricks that in order to be effective, the spectator had to be given the feeling that you were doing something. This seems to go against all that we've been taught all these years, doesn't it? But I think you'll agree that in these cases it was necessary. In each case, the spectator was led to believe that the magician had the opportunity and, in fact, did do something, even though the spectator didn't catch it. Granted, this is not a complete or rational answer, but remember, it doesn't have to be in order to satisfy him. It doesn't even have to be consistent with the facts. Now let's look at how the too perfect theory might apply to tricks depending on sleight of hand. In order not to infringe on anyone's rights, let's take a real old chestnut. Working very close to the spectators, with his sleeves rolled up, the magician reaches in his pocket, removes a handful of small change, selects a coin, places it in his left hand, closes his hand, makes a few mystic passes, and slowly opens his left hand to show the spectators that the coin has completely vanished. Most of you will recognize that the trick is comprised of equal parts of both bluff and acting ability. The magician never picks a coin from his handful of change, he merely pretends to do so. His acting ability carries it from that point onwards. The problem that arises is that the spectator is led to the proper conclusion on some occasions. For these reasons, number one, the magician is working too close in his estimation to get away with too much. And number two, the magician could not have used his sleeves because they were rolled up. Ergo, that sneaky devil didn't have a coin to begin with. Try this approach next time. As you are placing the discarded change back into your pocket, hold back a coin corresponding to the one you're supposedly holding in your other hand. Do this by just resting your thumb on it. Bring your hand out of your pocket, relaxed, and palm downwards. As your right hand approaches the left, curl your left hand into a loose fist. Pretend to rub the coin on the back of your left hand. After a bit of this business, open the fingers of your right hand to show that the coin has apparently vanished. Immediately turn the left hand over to show that the coin is now in that hand, nothing having vanished, but penetrated. What is the difference? Let's jump inside the spectator's mind now, and we'll find that he is subconsciously reasoning that if there is a coin at the climax, there must have been one in the beginning. Consciously, he's thinking, that damn guy is fast. He must have slipped that coin around his hand while I wasn't looking. Clever. There is another old effect attributed in my notebook to Milburn Christopher, where a paper match is torn from a booklet containing a known number of matches. A spectator is given the booklet to hold, after which the magician lights the match he's torn out. The burnt match suddenly vanishes, and the spectator finds it back in the booklet he has been holding. The match is not only burnt, but it's still firmly attached to the book. Additionally, there is, upon counting the matches, one more match than when last counted. This serves to prove that the burned match really flew back and reattached itself. Be honest now. Do you really think that the spectator believes this baloney? Or does he use his head and find himself led to the obvious conclusion that somehow you hid the extra match from sight? And if you fail to rapidly move on to another trick, he's bound to discover how you used the subtlety of bending the match downward at the beginning of the effect. A very subtle and important imperfection is to have the match reappear in the booklet unattached. The effect is now believable and doesn't insult the spectator's intelligence. He's now willing to believe it's the same match and is more willing to give you the credit for some pretty crafty work. There's no clue left as to how you did it. The cleverness is unseen. An additional touch. Try reversing the burning procedure at the outset. Remove a match, but burn the whole book instead of the single match. This adds a bit of flash and color, doesn't it? It also subtly indicates that there couldn't be anything in the book untouched by the conflagration. Of course, the match reappears unburned and unattached. Different method? Yes. Try pulling forward the striking surface of the matchbook just a bit and laying an unburned match in the little space between this area and the matches themselves, allowing the head of the match to protrude out of the left-hand side of the booklet. Push the striking surface back into place and hold the matchbook between your left thumb and forefinger at the extreme left edge. The match, of course, is squeezed between and hidden by these fingers. Now you may obviously display the matchbook very fairly and much more openly. Bend the cover of the booklet back over and behind the booklet, holding it there with the pressure of your left second finger. Remove 2 matches, setting one aside, and using the other one to light and burn the rest of the matches in the booklet. patter a bit, giving the matches a chance to cool. You may also use an already lighted cigarette to start the blaze. In any event, after the matches have cooled, grasp the matchbook on its right edge with your right thumb and forefinger. Holding it firmly with these right fingers, slide your left thumb and forefinger along with the protruding match head upward along the left edge of the booklet. Obviously, the match will pivot upwards onto the face of the booklet. Your hands rise slightly in order to cover this action. Now let go of the match and close the booklet with your left fingers. Hand the booklet to the spectator and proceed according to the normal routine. The preceding paragraphs have not intended to overlook the fact that many people have been doing and getting away with too perfect tricks for years without imperfecting them. I'm sure they have. But unless they were done at carefully chosen, psychologically correct times, with an abundant supply of acting ability thrown in for good measure, they could never have fooled anyone. More specifically, in order to be most mystifying, they could only be accomplished after first convincing the spectators by prior miracles, convincing them that you could do the impossible, then moving on rapidly to subsequent miracles of a sounder nature, preventing the spectators from giving the situation much thought. It follows that such effects, for the most part, could not stand alone or could not be used for a one-shot bit, an opening or closing effect. It should be apparent that by applying the imperfecting technique, otherwise shaky effects requiring a great deal of skill in placement and performance come close to being completely flexible and can be performed practically whenever the mood moves one. Also, please don't misunderstand and assume for a moment that my argument claims or infers that all tricks should be imperfected. Many effects need not to be imperfected. Many cannot be imperfected. It's a matter of cool judgment, best gained by examining an effect from a spectator's point of view. It is also most evident that the too perfect theory is most germane to the field of close-up magic, however. There are numerous examples of its application or need in the area of stage magic. It can also be applied to mentalism. The need here, however, is lessened by the fact that most people believe in, or would like to believe in, the possibility of ESP. In summary, the explanation of the too perfect theory has attempted to point out that man must have an answer or solution to those things that bewilder him. It behooves magicians to avoid leaving a spectator one accurate path to follow, leading to the modus operandi, or to leave the onlooker paths that take credit away from the magician himself. It's better to direct the spectator to follow a path of the magician's own choosing, leading him to the conclusion that the magician is some clever devil. That's the name of the game, baby. Rick Johnsson, Hierophant, 1971. Rick Johnsson captured the imaginations of magicians with the essay, The Too Perfect Theory. In the ensuing 40 years since its first publication, many magicians have come to accept the words as truth. But not Tom Stone. In this biting but balanced counterattack, Stone takes issue not only with the proposed solution, but also with the very analysis of the problems Rick Johnsson attempted to solve. Too Perfect, Imperfect by Tom Stone. Some tricks, by virtue of their perfection, become imperfect. Conversely, some tricks, by virtue of their imperfection, become perfect. Rick Johnsson. When, about 25 years ago, I heard of the too perfect theory, I thought the idea that some magical effects can be so perfect, so impossible, That they allowed no conceivable explanation to an audience but their actual method was beautiful, and the way in which it was formulated gave me one of those aha feelings. I fell immediately in love with it. Through the years, though, I've begun to suspect the merits of the theory aren't as great as I had initially thought. To start with, it's impossible to use the theory to predict the success of an effect, and because of this, the value of the theory is limited. The theory says its secrets concern only some tricks, but it doesn't define how those tricks can be recognized. So in practice, you have to perform a trick first, judge it by the reactions it receives, then decide if the trick belongs in the some tricks category the theory is describing. Some tricks work beautifully, even when they seem utterly impossible. And some tricks do not. A good theory should make it easier to predict if the trick will be received in the manner hoped. The too-perfect theory fails to do that. The too-perfect theory claims an effect that is too perfect must be made less so to become deceptive. But how do you decide how much less perfect an effect must be to succeed? How do you know when you have gone too far, or not far enough, or when you have achieved just the right amount of imperfection? In the word project are the implicit ideas of comparison and degree, but if there is no definition in the context of a magic effect of the right degree of perfection, it is pointless even to use the word. If I said, "The size of my shoes is perfect," this can't be viewed as a universal statement unless everyone has feet the same size as mine. So, to use the concept of perfect, you need to define an agreed measure with which you can judge the degree of perfection. This is the reason why both supporters and opponents of the too-perfect theory have a difficult time proving their positions. Both sides have proofs to support their stances, but not enough proofs to convince the other side. Rick Johnsson formulated the theory in print in 1970, and in the ensuing 40 years, neither side has succeeded in coming any closer to achieving a convincing conclusion, even though some great thinkers have expertly argued pro and contra. I suspect this is due to the theory being neither right nor wrong. Instead, there might be another explanation, one previously unexplored, and I believe an application of Occam's razor might support this assumption. In the Books of Wonder, Volume 2, Tommy Wonder divides the too-perfect theory into two parts, an analysis and a suggested solution. He sees no problem in the analysis, but refuses to accept the solution the analyst suggests, because he considers that solution as detrimental to his art. But if you assume the analysis correct, you should have no choice but to follow the solution given by the theory. Even though this isn't a proof of a flawed theory, I view it as a signpost to the location of the problem. That is, if the theory is flawed, it is in the form of the analysis it demands. A good analysis should provide a useful solution, one that an artist of even the highest caliber, like Tommy Wonder, would accept. The only thing I can imagine that would explain why both supporters and opponents of the theory have found enough proofs to maintain their positions, and at the same time would explain why the phrase "some tricks" remains undefined, is that the theory is incomplete. And because of its incompleteness, the too-perfect theory becomes invalid in both its analysis and its suggested solution. But how is its analysis invalid? In many cases, the proofs of too-perfect an effect are simply misunderstandings of basic magic concepts. In every trick, at some point there is a deception that causes the audience to assume that something false is true. that truth is an illusion because reality is different. That is, there is a fork in the path of perceived events. For example, you might create the illusion that a selected card is inserted into the middle of the deck, but in reality, it remains on top. When we make these two different perceptions merge, we get an effect. When the top card is shown to be the selection, it appears to have risen magically from the center. What is interesting here is that it is at the point when the two perceptions are superimposed that the audience assumes the trick happened, even though the actual deception occurred long before. We magicians are not immune to this process. Let's say that our deception fails. It is not as convincing as we would like. In such cases, we do not get the superimposition of perceived realities for which we are aiming. Since the spectators don't know what the illusion was meant to be, they will not protest and will reluctantly follow along. But they will find their own paths. Paths that might in part approach reality and in part approach the intended illusion. But we don't find this out until we reach the effect, the point where the reality and the intended illusion are merged. And it is at that point, due to the lack of response, that we learn we have a problem. And since we notice the problem at the point of the effect, it is easy to believe it is at that point a solution has to be applied. The following example of a burnt and restored bill effect is sometimes claimed as too perfect. A bill is borrowed. It is then openly burnt to ashes. A spectator lowers a box from the ceiling and opens it, and inside is the borrowed bill. Of course, the spectator will immediately believe the bill is a duplicate, not because the effect is too perfect, but because the bill didn't vanish to begin with. To destroy something is not the same thing as vanishing it. Think about it. Translating it to a card effect may make it easier to comprehend. A spectator signs a selected card. It is torn apart and the pieces are dropped to the table. The magician brings out his wallet, opens it, and removes the selected card restored. But the spectator still sees the torn pieces on the table, so he must reasonably assume the card in the wallet is a duplicate. Destruction is not a magical effect. Some magicians claim they achieve a stronger effect when they make the conditions less perfect by putting the bill into an envelope before they burn it. But that is incorrect, because to destroy the bill in full view is not an effect. However, when the bill is put into an envelope, the perceived effect is that the bill vanishes gradually while the envelope burns. From this, we can see that burning the bill in full view is not perfect at all, because it isn't even an effect. Putting the bill into an envelope might seem to a magician less impossible, but it is in fact a huge improvement, because the magician is perceived to have made the bill vanish, a magical effect, rather than to have destroyed it, an act anyone is capable of and understands. Now, if one could find a way of burning the bill without leaving behind any ashes, perhaps one could burn it in full view and still create the effect of a vanish. Maybe the borrowed bill could be switched for a flash bill, or the perceived magical effect might be altered from a transposition to that of a restoration, something along these lines. A bill is borrowed and signed, then burnt in full view. As the owner of the bill examines a lemon, the performer collects the ashes. He then rubs them against the lemon, making them disappear. And when the lemon is cut open, the restored signed bill is found inside. The general method needn't be changed, but the effect is constructed to avoid confusion between destruction and disappearance. Let's take our analysis of the burnt and restored bill further. Magicians commonly perform this effect by putting the bill into an envelope. The envelope is burnt. Then the performer brings a wallet from his pocket and produces the bill from it. This presentation elicits a good reaction. Now let's say our magician decides to improve the effect by making the bill reappear in a box hanging from the ceiling. But when he tries this, he's surprised to find the audience no longer accepts the effect. Instead, they suspect that the bill produced is a duplicate. In trying to analyze why this has occurred, he applies the two-perfect theory and concludes that this improvement made the effect too unbelievable. But the analysis the two-perfect theory provides examines only the part of the effect that has been improved and doesn't hint in the slightest that the problem might lie elsewhere. And because of this, the two-perfect theory, as a diagnostic tool, is incomplete, and every solution it offers will also be incomplete or flawed or dead wrong. A complete theory would take into account the whole effect, not just the perfected part. And a complete theory would ask, in comparison to what is the problematic part too perfect? I strongly suspect there is a larger theory, and the current two-perfect theory is only a part of that greater whole. Unfortunately, I don't know what the larger theory might be, but I believe it would include the concept of balance within an effect. Why did our magician's effect fail when he made the burnt bill reappear in a suspended box? Why did it raise suspicions of a duplicate? The answer is that the reappearance of the bill is too perfect when compared to the initial vanish. There is an imbalance in the effect because the vanish is not deceptive enough to support such an impossible reappearance. But the current incomplete theory only suggests we make the climax less impossible. A complete theory would recommend that we make the ending less impossible, or make the beginning more impossible, or adjust both beginning and end to equalize their levels of impossibility. Perhaps people looking at the burnt bill and box effect aren't taken in completely by the initial deception, and, instead of following the intended illusion, think, the bill has vanished. He must have managed to sneak it out of the envelope without me seeing it. Give me a few minutes, and I'll figure out how he did it. The bill is probably in his pocket. Then the box is lowered from the ceiling and the bill is shown inside. The spectators who still suspect the bill ended up in the performer's pocket instantly conclude that the bill in the box must be a duplicate. The solution provided by the current theory is to make the reappearance less impossible by having the bill appear inside a wallet, which is in the inside pocket of the magician's jacket. Spectators who suspect the bill was sneaked to a pocket will now believe the bill in the wallet is the same one apparently burnt, and that the magician is extremely skilled in being able to slip it into the wallet without being seen. But because the two-perfect theory is incomplete, it gives no indication that the solution is a question of balance, and that an alternative answer exists. Make the beginning as impossible as the ending. If spectators don't have a clue of where the bill went and are unable to conceive of a solution, the reappearance of the bill inside a box hanging from the ceiling will have a strong effect. People will think, wait a minute, what happened? The bill vanished. Did he sneak it into his pocket? No, he didn't even touch the bill. Is that guy from the audience a stooge? No, he looks just as surprised as me. And no one is that good an actor. I have no idea where the bill went, and it doesn't matter how long I think about it, I'll never have a clue. Wait, now the bill is inside that box. Well, that place is just as impossible as any other. This analysis, I believe, provides the solution to Tommy Wonder's problem with his watch in nest of boxes. Tommy never changed the method he used for vanishing the borrowed watch, a method that follows a century-old tradition, smashing the watch while it is inside a cloth bag. And this method does not seem impossible enough to support his extraordinary production of the watch from a nest of boxes. The reappearance isn't too perfect. Instead, the vanish isn't perfect enough. A complete theory would have told Tommy the reappearance is too impossible when compared to the vanish. The solution is either to make the ending less impossible or to find a better disappearance for the watch. Another Tommy Wonder piece offers a further indication that the too-perfect theory is incomplete. That piece is his masterful version of the grapefruit, lemon, egg, and canary. In this routine, a bird, an egg, and a lemon are vanished and reappear in an impossible place. The bird reappears inside the egg, which reappears inside the lemon, which reappears inside the grapefruit. If Rick Johnson's theory were complete, it would be impossible for Tommy to get a good reaction with this routine, because each reappearance is, according to the too-perfect theory, simply too good to be true. However, the routine works beautifully just as it is, and draws a huge response from audiences. And that is only because, as a more complete theory would have predicted, each vanish is strong enough to support the impossible ending. This is a routine with internal balance. The great thinker Arturo de Ascanio applied the principle of balance in effect with a tighter focus in his theory of degrees of freedom. Ascanio observed that when a playing card is chosen and returned to the deck, the freedom of the selection should equal the freedom of its return. If the magician ribbon spreads the deck and has someone pick any card, then gathers the deck and demands that the card be replaced in the middle, just where he has cut, the combination of these procedures arouses suspicion, because the selection was utterly free, while its return was seriously restricted. To eliminate suspicion, the freedom of selection and return must be made, at least outwardly. Ascanio's theory of degrees of freedom is a special case in our larger theory of comparison and balance in an effect. When we add these two concepts to the too-perfect theory, it becomes more complete and useful. However, this is just another piece in the puzzle of formulating a larger theory of magical effectiveness. Someday perhaps someone will do for this theory what Einstein did for physics, seeing a greater part of the whole, where others before had found only pretty fragments. I am certainly not magic's Einstein, but I hope one day to meet him. Tom Stone, Nordisk Magi, 2000. Tom Stone. Sweden's Tom Stone is a deeply passionate, artistic performer. His work is a mixture of classical effects with practical methods and whimsical new plots with methods as outrageous as the effects they serve. Eugene Berger begins this next essay with a meditation on the merits of magic theory in general, a topic quite appropriate for this audiobook. But it takes a surprise turn halfway through, when he uses the same logic to analyze the magic effect. And it boils down to this: not every moment of a magic effect must contain magic, but every single moment must be fascinating. On the Structure of Magic Effects by Eugene Berger. I have always found the distinction we typically make between theory and practice rather curious. Is it really a valid distinction? Are these two things so very separate? and unrelated? If so, in what sense? One can certainly theorize about magic from one's armchair without ever putting one's theories into practice. But does the opposite ever hold? Is there ever practice without some kind of theory behind it? In other words, does one ever present a magic performance without some understanding of what he or she is doing? Even if one's understanding is garbled and confused, isn't there always some sense of understanding undergirding our actions? If there is, the issue isn't whether one should indulge in theories or be free of theories, but rather which theories are best to help us reach our goals. Here is a theory for you to consider. Let me put it very simply. It appears to me that magical effects, whether close-up card tricks or grand illusions, exhibit much the same general structure in performance. First, I want to explain what I take this structure to be. Second, I will draw two implications. I think that if we understand these implications and take them seriously, which means, of course, putting them into practice, to act upon them, our magical performances might indeed be greatly improved. Think of any magic effect that you enjoy performing. For the sake of analysis, imagine that we can divide this effect into a series of discrete moments leading to a final moment of magic. We can look at most magic effects in this way. We do this all the time in almost all areas of our lives. We divide things up, we separate things, and distinguish between them. Yet we must be cautious here. This is, after all, an act of the imagination. Being a bit cautious, then, I would add a qualification. When we do this division in thought, when we divide any magic effect into separate moments for analysis, this activity always has an artificial quality for two reasons. First, because all such division is ultimately arbitrary and based upon the views and values of the one who is doing the dividing, I might divide the effect into 6 moments, and you might choose 7, and others might find 5 or 9. The fact is that we might all want to enjoy the same pie, but some of us might have very different ideas on how to slice it up. The second reason that such divisions are artificial is because, at its best, in performance, a magical effect is much more than a series of discrete moments. It is a flowing movement. The better the performance, the more seamless the movement, the choreography. For the speaking performer, of course, this involves both the choreography of our actions and the choreography of our speech, aiming at a marriage of our words and actions so they happily work together. Even admitting this qualification, the fact is that the human mind loves, and very often profits from, this dividing activity, and so, in thought and imagination, we can and do split the seamless movement of a piece of magic into discrete moments. Here is an example. Consider one of my favorite stage illusions, Siegfried and Roy's marvelous transformation of Lynette Chapel into a tiger. We might divide this into the following discrete moments. The glass box is lowered containing Lynette. The box is covered with a cloth. Roy dramatically pulls the cloth from the box, revealing the tiger. Now consider one of my favorite close-up card effects, Matt Schulian's card in the matchbook. It might be divided as follows. A card is selected. The card is returned to the deck. The card is secretly brought to the top. The card is secretly palmed off. The spectator shuffles the cards. The card is secretly folded. The card is secretly loaded into the matchbook. The audience discovers the card in the matchbook. Needless to say, since the pie can be cut in several different ways, one could certainly make more or fewer divisions than the 7 I have suggested. One might, for instance, not include those moments in which the performer is doing something secretly, especially if one were dividing the effect from the audience's perception. From the performer's perspective, however, such moments are critically important. Alternatively, one might add, after moment 7, another moment in which the audience first discovers the selected card is not in the deck. After this discovery, the card is then found in the matchbook. However many discrete moments you conceive, however, I think that each discrete moment must exhibit at least one common feature. Each moment must be experienced by the audience as being fair and above board. No moment must arouse suspicion. A common structure of magical effects thereby emerges. Regarding each moment in a magic effect, the audience says, "Yes, that was fair. Yes, that was fair. Yes, that was fair." And then the moment of magic occurs and the audience says, "Wow, what happened here?" Thus, I would say that the general structure of most magical effects can be put as follows: fair, 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 wow. From this rather simple analysis, two implications may be drawn for our own magical performances. First, for the final moment of magic to create real impact on our audiences, every previous moment in the magic effect must meet the standard of, "Yes, that was fair." If any moment fails to meet this standard, the magical effect is diluted or even destroyed. Take the Schulian card in the matchbook as an example. What happens to the magical effect if I raise the suspicion in the audience as I execute my card control? I want to execute a pass, for instance, but members of my audience notice a weird jiggle of the cards as I am holding them. They know that I did something, even if they don't know exactly what I did. In such a situation, I think it is rather obvious that the final effect of magic will be thereby diluted. Again, what if I flash when attempting to palm the card? Again, isn't the final moment of magic diluted, perhaps even destroyed? In the same way, when attempting to secretly fold the card, what happens if the audience notices that my right hand, below the edge of the table, is quite clearly doing something? Again, if we're honest, don't we need to admit that the final impact of my performance will be dramatically weakened? So, the first implication of my analysis tells us that no moment in a magic effect must arouse suspicion. Every moment must be perceived as being fair and above board. How can I apply this theory to my practice of magic? Very simply, I can apply it by examining every moment in each of my magic presentations to see if every moment really is deceptive. In other words, we need to discover for ourselves if our performance in each moment really appears fair to our audiences. We must look at each moment and honestly ask ourselves if we are raising any suspicion, or if we are only fooling ourselves. Too often, we see magical performances in which little attention was paid to the early moments in the effect. The performer seemed to think that if the final magical climax is amazing, the moments leading up to that climax do not need to be carefully considered and examined. Yet not to examine them is to present second-rate magic. This leads to the second implication. Not only must every moment of a magic effect be perceived as being fair, every moment leading up to the magical climax must be in focus so that the audience can later remember that each moment was fair and above suspicion. Perhaps the best way to keep the effect in focus is to treat each moment as an important moment. What is important commands my attention. If I perceive something before me as important, I willingly give it my attention. In a magic performance, though some moments may be more critical than others, no moment really is unimportant. Every moment needs to be given a sense of importance so that our audience never loses focus and the effect's impact is not lessened. This means that we need to evaluate our magical work not only in regard to its deceptiveness, we must also evaluate it in terms of the sense of importance we are able to create with each moment of our performance. By its very definition, an act of magic is special. It is already important. Without preserving this sense that what we are doing is special and important, we may be presenting stunts, but we are not presenting magic. Eugene Berger, Mystery School, 2003.